Well, look, there's some folks I respect who have criticized the fight from last week. I got to tell you, I think some of their criticisms, that they may not perhaps appreciate everything that happened last week. Listen, I think it was a debacle last week. What Republican leadership did, the way last week played out is the week began with Republican Senate leadership asking every Senate Republican to affirmatively consent to allowing Harry Reid to raise the debt ceiling, to add trillions of dollars in new debt with no reforms whatsoever to our out-of-control spending. Now, Javier, if you get outside of Washington and you ask anybody on the street, should we add trillions to our national debt while doing nothing to fix the out-of-control spending, just about anyone will say, of course not. And that's not even a partisan view. That's true of Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians. But what Mitch McConnell asked every Republican to do was to affirmatively consent to changing the Senate rules. And it took our affirmative consent because the normal Senate rules provide that you need 60 votes to do that. But by unanimous consent, by all 100 senators agreeing to change the rules, you can lower the threshold to 51. Mm-hmm. And the virtue of doing so, he explained, was that the debt ceiling would be raised, trillions more debt would be added, but every Republican could vote no. And my response was that I said there was no universe in which I could affirmatively consent to giving Harry Reid that authority, because, Javier, frankly, I think that would have been unfaithful to the voters who elected me. I promised Texans for 2 years, traveling the state of Texas, that I would go to Washington and fight with every ounce of my strength to stop the out-of-control spending, stop the debt, to pull us back from this fiscal and economic brink. And if I were to go and consent to giving Harry Reid the power to do so, that would not be honoring my commitment to the voters. And I got to tell you, Republican leadership wasn't happy, because what they wanted was they wanted a show vote. They wanted the ability for every Republican to vote no, but also for all of us to give Reid the power to do so. And instead I objected and said, listen, let's have some transparency. Let's have some honesty. If you don't want the debt ceiling raised with no conditions, then vote no. And if you do, then own the vote and defend it to your constituents. But don't say one thing back home and vote a different way in Washington.
Well, you're the original wacko bird, according to Senator McCain. How is your relationship with him, McConnell, Graham? I was going to say Graham, to see what I just did. Senator Lindsey Graham. How is your relationship with them?
Oh, look, it varies. Every senator, both Democrat and Republican, I treat with civility, with respect, and that's been the case from the day I arrived. And the relationship is fine. I will concede that not all of them are terrible fans of my having stood up and fought for the people who elected me, my having stood up for the principles that I believe we've got to stand to turn this country around. I mean, Javier, what is so frustrating to millions of Americans is that Washington politicians aren't listening. I've said many times, I think the greatest divide we have in this country is not between Democrats and Republicans. It is between entrenched politicians in Washington of both parties and the American people. Look, we have right now $17 trillion in national debt. That's grown from $10 trillion when Obama was elected. It's larger now than the size of our entire economy. And congressional leaders in both parties just led the fight to add several trillion more on top of that while doing nothing to stop bankrupting our future. No wonder Congress is at a 13% approval rating, when you've got leaders in Congress who aren't addressing the concerns and priorities of the American people. The American people want jobs and economic growth back. They want government to live within its means, and Congress isn't doing that right now.
Do you think it's fair that they blame you for the shutdown because you actually were the one who stood up and said, look, this needs to be done, we have to stand up? You, Rand Paul, and also Senator Marco Rubio. Mm-hmm. But they blame you. You are the culprit. How do you feel about that?
Listen, I'm proud to have stood with the American people. If you look at the fight we had last fall to try to stop Obamacare, millions of Americans rose up, lit up the phones, called Capitol Hill, spoke up, and as a consequence of that, we elevated the debate about the enormous harms that Obamacare is causing. Now, a lot of establishment Republicans said, well, this has done enormous damage. Well, listen, I think the proof is in the pudding. Where are we right now today? Right now today, Obama is at the lowest approval rating he's ever been at. Obamacare is at the lowest approval rating it's ever been at. We've got a good 12 or 13 Senate races that are competitive nationwide, and I think the critical reason why was the fight we had over Obamacare that elevated the debate, and people realize that millions of Americans are being hurt by Obamacare. The way we win elections, Javier, I think, is not putting our heads down, standing for nothing, not rocking the boat. Instead, it is, as Reagan said, painting in bold colors, not pale pastels. That's how we win elections.
When you guys go to lunch, I know you guys all take the little train over at lunch to have the little powwow with all the powers that be in the Senate and have lunch. Who do you sit with?
You know, it varies. I mean, there are a handful of tables,
John
and
McCain, Lindsey Graham.
I sit often with John or Lindsey, or it's kind of wherever there's an empty chair.
I would love to
people
be a
sit
fly
there.
on that wall in that room.
Listen, I get along very well with both McCain and Graham. I mean, John McCain and I had dinner together a couple of months ago, just the two of us. It was a wonderful dinner. Now, we disagree on a lot of things, but I respect and admire. I mean, this is a man who fought for his country, who was imprisoned, who was a prisoner of war, who was tortured, and amazingly was offered early release and turned it down because it would be dishonorable.